Hello, welcome or welcome back. My name is Ari, and today we are doing part one of my two-part video series talking about the 20 books nominated for the Goodreads Choice Awards in the fantasy category. I have read all 20 books, so I'm going to talk about them in these videos. Why is this two parts? Well, basically because it's 20 books, and even if I just spent 2 minutes talking about each book, that would already be a 40-minute video, not including any like intros or anything like that. So let's break it up. Today we are going to do the bottom 10, so 11 through 20. Tomorrow, when the placements are finalized and everything, I'll talk about the top 10. So I know what books are 11 through 20, but not in the order Goodreads are going to put them in. And that's basically because in the final round you vote for the top 10. So anything that was in the top 20 and is not in the top 10 is obviously in the bottom 10. But because this video is going up before the winners are finalized, we're going to do it in my order. So basically, starting at number 20, and this is the book that I thought was the worst book. And we'll just work our way up from there. At number 20, I have A Spindle Splintered by Alex E. Harrow, and this isn't particularly surprising that this would be my lowest rated book. I don't really get along with Alex E. Harrow's writing and her particular type of feminism. To me, she writes as if her feminism is the only way you could be feminist. And if you disagree with her, you suddenly hate women. And that's the vibe that I get from all of her books, and I don't like it. So I don't like her writing. This is a Sleeping Beauty retelling, and Sleeping Beauty is one of my favorite Disney princesses, but she has a very interesting way of opening up this book where she basically says that if you like Disney princesses, there's something wrong with you, because you can't like princesses being saved by princes and still be feminists. And then you especially can't like Sleeping Beauty unless you're a dying girl. And even then you shouldn't like her because it's a Disney princess. And that like start to the story was just like, why am I bothering reading this book that is supposed to be a retelling of the Sleeping Beauty story if you're gonna start in the very first paragraph telling me I'm trash for liking Sleeping Beauty? Why bother continuing the story? You already judged me. I just didn't like this book. I didn't think the story was very good. It's very predictable because it is a retelling. It's literally like every single version of Sleeping Beauty is all just parallel universes of Sleeping Beauty, and they all come together in this book. If you like Alex E. Harrow's writing, you may like this, but I thought this was absolute trash and ended up giving it 1 star. The next lowest book at number 19 for me is The Wolf and the Woodsmen. And this book I thought would be higher. And I also thought it was a Red Riding Hood retelling. And it is, as far as I can tell, it's not really a retelling. Or if it is, it's a very vague retelling. But I still didn't like it. I think I gave this one 2 stars. And mostly it's because of the, how do I put this? Mostly because this has like extreme religious undertones to it, where the Woodsman character is Catholic and then the wolf character is like pagan religion. Actually, she's half pagan, half Jewish, but it's not called Jewish, it's called something else. But the way it's described, it's very Jewish. And I don't like overtly religious fantasy, and I don't like reading about characters who hate each other because of religion. Like, the Woodsman hates her and treats her like shit because she does not follow the same religion as he does. And I get that that is something that happens all the time in the universe, but it's not something that I enjoy reading about. I don't get any joy of reading subject matter like that. On top of that, like, the story didn't make sense at points. It had a lot of plot holes. It had attraction that didn't make sense. It's like, I'm Catholic and I hate you because you're not Catholic, but you're kind of hot and I want to fuck you. So I am going to argue with myself about whether I should hate you or if I should fuck you. And I just don't like stories like that. So this one wasn't for me. I think if you liked the, oh, what is that, like For Blood and Honey or something like that? I'll put the cover over here because I can't remember the title. But if you like that series, you may like The Wolf and the Woodsman. But if you didn't like the series, I don't think you'll like The Wolf and the Woodsman either. At number 18, I put the other Sleeping Beauty retelling, which is kind of weird that both of them are so far at the bottom because I like Sleeping Beauty. But this is Malice, and this is a Sleeping Beauty retelling from the perspective of, like, Maleficent, but she's called Alice in this book. And it's not quite a one-for-one retelling because in this universe there are a thing called graces, and graces can create potions for a price to, like, make you more beautiful or make you more intelligent or make you sing better or whatever. And Malice, or Alice, is a grace, but she's a dark grace. So her potions, instead of doing good, do bad. Where it'll make you look like a frog, or it'll make it where you can't sing, or your voice just comes out as a croak, or general stuff like that. And she's the highest earning grace, but she's also treated really, really badly just because she's the dark grace. This book I didn't like because there's so many, like, convenient plot holes, and it has the miscommunication trope that I really, really hate. Like, miscommunication where you purposely hide something from somebody or just believe something out of nowhere, and don't ever communicate with the person you're supposed to be in love with, and then bad things happen because of that. I can't stand that. Worst trope ever. This is very prevalent in this book, and it's supposed to be written off as Alice has a very, very hard time trusting people, so because she's been treated badly. But for the convenience of the plot of the story, there's a few people who she just, like, instinctively trusts, only so the story can set it up so those people can betray her later. And it's like, well, why did you ever trust anybody? Because they obviously betray you. But it's like, she doesn't trust anybody. Just the story set it up where she randomly went out of her own characterization and trusted these people so they could betray her. I have no desire to finish this series, and I didn't think the love story was really there. I couldn't get a sense of why the characters liked each other or anything like that. So, don't recommend. Didn't really like it. And now, at number 17, we're getting into 3-star books. If I didn't say it, Spindle Splintered was 1 star, The Wolf and the Woodsman and Malice were both 2 stars, and now we're getting into 3-star books. And these lower 3-star books are really ones that are just so incredibly forgettable. So that's where we're going. And at the bottom of this is the most forgettable of the forgettable, and that is the Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. And this follows 2 young girls. One of them is like a princess with a very evil, like, emperor king as a brother, and he wants her to sacrifice herself to a pyre, is like a way to worship the gods, and she refuses to, so he's like locked her up until she agrees to sacrifice herself, and then the other girl is her maid. And I thought this was like one of those, like, where there's like a princess and a maid and they switch places stories, but that's not it at all. The women are never like confused for each other, and don't ever switch places or anything like that. But overall, like, I really like the idea of this book, is like fighting back against an evil empire who, or an evil emperor, but like the execution just wasn't there. The story went on so much longer than it needed to. It's like there was a conclusion and then it kept going, and another conclusion, and then it kept going, and another conclusion, and it was just like, okay, this is done. Like, stop. The other part that I had problems with is it was from two different perspectives, but reading from the perspectives, unless you read the character's name on the title before going into that chapter, it was very, very hard to distinguish between which character you were following. That they just weren't different enough in personalities, even though they should have been two, like, wildly different people. Overall, this book wasn't like the worst thing I ever read, but too long, boring, and not enough difference between the characters. Next up at number 16, I put The Chosen in the Beautiful by Nihi Vo, which is a Great Gatsby retelling from the perspective of Josephine Baker, but Josephine Baker is Asian and there is magic. Also, her name is Jordan Baker, not Josephine Baker. I just can't words. But the problem with this for me is it's The Great Gatsby. This is not a retelling. It's scene by scene The Great Gatsby, but from Josephine's perspective instead, and there's some extra scenes in there because Josephine was a really minor character in the original Gatsby. The only real change to the story is there's magic. But it's The Great Gatsby. So if you really, really like The Great Gatsby, you'll probably like this book. If you don't like The Great Gatsby, or you're just kind of like me, where it's like you feel mediocre about The Great Gatsby, you've already read this. You're not getting anything new. At number 15, I put The Hidden Palace, which is the second book in the Gollum and Genie series, and this was so boring. I ended up getting the audiobook just to get through it because I was so bored reading this. Though technically this is fantasy, because you follow a Gollum and a Genie, so technically it's fantasy. Both of them are magical creatures. Golems are Jewish lore and genies are like Syrian lore. It covers all of like the standard things that you would hear about either creature, but it takes place in the early 19th century, and both the Golem and the Genie are immigrants in New York City. The Golem works as a baker. And she's like a single Jewish female who works as a baker, and the Genie is a tinsmith. So if you are interested in historical fiction, or you prefer to read historical fiction, but you want to like dip your toes into fantasy, this might be the book for you. But if you are like me and have no interest in reading like day-to-day life of immigrants in the early 19th century, probably not for you either. But yeah, this is a really popular series and people seem to love it. It's gotten very, very high ratings. It just read much more like a historical fiction to me than it did a fantasy. Even though it is a fantasy. It's just a historical fiction with a sprinkling of fantasy dust. Next up is the Unbroken by C.L. Clarke, and this is another one that is quickly just fading from memory. There wasn't anything about this book that really stood out as something that I really, really enjoyed. This, though the concept was super, super interesting, this follows a young woman named Train, I think, and she, as a child of 5 years old, was taken from her mother by an invading army, and she was taken from her country back to this invading army's country, put into a school for native children, basically, and raised to be a conscript in the army. And she's in her early 20s now, and she went to the school and then she fought for the army, and she has not really been raised in her own country's traditions. She's been raised in this other country's traditions, and the other country is France. She's from North Africa in Fantasyland, and she gets kidnapped by France in Fantasyland. At the beginning of the book, her and her troops, because she's a lieutenant, have been sent back to her home country, and they are invading again, and they are sent there to put down a rebellion. And that seems like it should be really interesting. The concept is really interesting, but the execution just wasn't there for me. The other perspective in this story is the crown princess of Fantasy France. I don't remember the name of the land, so we're calling it Fantasy France. And her parents died before she was old enough to take the throne, and so her uncle is ruling as a regent until he determines that she is ready to take the crown. And it's kind of one of those things where you pretty much know he's never going to think she's ready to take the crown, and he sends her as well to Fantasy North Africa to lead putting down the rebellion when she hasn't, apparently she's supposed to be trained to rule from her infancy, but we show no signs of her having any ability at all to rule. And she does a bunch of really stupid, annoying things that even I can tell are stupid, and I have no interest in politics. I definitely have never been raised to rule anything. And I can tell that the shit she's doing is stupid and not something that a princess or whatever should be doing. But I was bored again. There's a lot of religion in here, which again I don't particularly like, and the story it didn't make sense to me at a lot of points. So again, not the worst thing, and you may like it more than I did. This is not one that I would say absolutely don't read. I'd say this is a form your own opinion type of story. I just didn't love it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. Next up at number 13 is A Master of Jinn, and this one was actually a pretty cool story, but there's one particular reason that it didn't get anything higher than 3 stars for me, and that's simply because this is a mystery. The main character is a detective, and that's just not my jam. That's it. It's a pretty decent story. I enjoyed it, other than the fact that I just don't care about mystery novels. So if you like mystery novels and want to read something that's fantasy based, I recommend this. Or if you like both mystery and fantasy, this is a good combination of both of them. The main character is a police detective. They're trying to solve some murders. If that's your jam, I would say definitely read this book. Now, at number 12, 12 and 11 are the only two, interestingly enough, that I would have put in my top 10. So that's actually pretty surprising that there's only two of them from the bottom 10 based on Goodreads that I wouldn't have in my bottom 10. And the first one is For the Wolf. Now, this, I thought, again, was a little Red Riding Hood retelling, but it is not. Nope. This was a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Good to know, right? So this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and basically in this fantasy universe, the ruling family is cursed, and the eldest daughter is for the crown. She's destined to rule, and the second daughter is for the wolf. So most of the time, the ruling family won't have a second daughter. They have one daughter, they stop having babies. But in this case, the girls are twins. So you get at the beginning of the book, and you know that the second daughter is to be sacrificed to the wolf. She's sent to this magical forest and given to the wolf in hopes that the wolf will free the 5 kings or something that have been trapped there for 400 years. And she is kind of like resigned to going, but her elder sister is like, you cannot go. I need you back. I need you here with me. But she ends up going, obviously, because it's a Beauty and the Beast. So she's got to go see the beast, and then from there it's a love story, and so it's fantasy romance, and I like fantasy romance. I thought this was a very interesting tale. I thought that the twists were pretty good. It wasn't quite 5-star level, but I really, really did like this story. And then the next story that you get, the sequel to this, is For the Throne, which I do plan on reading, and it follows the elder sister, and I believe it's a Sleeping Beauty retelling, but I could be wrong about that again. But yeah, it was a really, really interesting book, and if you like fantasy romance and Beauty and the Beast retellings, this might be for you. Next, at number 11, this is the book that I would have put number 1. This is the book that I originally voted for. So, a little off, and that is Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon. So 5 stars. This is going to be in my top 10 books of the year. This was a fantastic read, and I hope that more people read it. Me describing it's going to be a little bit hard because it's so weird that it's hard to describe. This follows a person who is very gender fluid, so I'm going to refer to them as they, them pronouns, and they have been raised in a cult, basically. And at the beginning of the book, they are pregnant with twins, and they run into the woods trying to escape the cult because they don't want their babies to go through the horrible things that they did in the cult. And basically run into the woods, see hallucinations, and have these babies in in the middle of the woods. And the book is so weird because there's a lot of things that you don't know if it's a hallucination or if it's magic or if it's like a weird medical experiment, but the representation in this book is awesome for non-binary characters, for sapphic characters, for trans characters. There's even a character who has got type 1 diabetes, and it's just weird with an unlikable female presenting character, and those are my favorite. So I highly recommend this, but I want you to be aware going into this that it's gonna be weird, but it's worth it. But that is my bottom from the Goodreads fantasy list. Let me know if you've read any of these books and if you agree or disagree. Also, let me know if you think any of these books should have been in the top 10. Also, don't forget to come back tomorrow where I talk about the top 10 fantasy, and I will also have comparisons for how I ranked all 20 of them, how Goodreads ranked all 20 of them, my initial predictions, different comparisons like that I will have in tomorrow's video. Anyway, thank you for being here, and I'll see you tomorrow.